345 milliards.
Ah oui.
Pour lesquels
Sécuriser beaucoup les villes. Sûreté de la voix, mais peut-être aussi les images que je projette dessus. Encore une fois, je crois que...
Merde. GSR n'a pas envoyé son texte. Je n'ai rien pour aujourd'hui. Ordinateur, raconte-moi une histoire. Tu peux halluciner un peu si tu veux, comme tu faisais quand tu étais tout petit.
Bien sûr, Madame Le Goff.
En anglais, connard.
Certainly, I can help you with that. Here you go. Story. 47 degrees, 31 minutes, 2 seconds north. 5 degrees, 55 minutes, 12 seconds west.
Call me a failure if you like. Say I gave up on life. I don't care. I'll never hear your judgments anyway. I reached a point where I just couldn't take the stress of my position, the lack of any acknowledgement or thanks from my peers, the meaningless e-signing of documents I didn't understand, the endless virtual paper shuffling. So when the double sun appeared one February morning, I took this as a sign, and I announced my resignation, a full 13 years before ordinary retirement age. Because I was still going to need to make a living, I took the deal that is open to civil servants, opting for early retirement, agreed to hand in my phone for good, and to go off and teach basic literacy to the pearl-diving children of the island. We all know, or believe we know, that when the island was discovered it was uninhabited, though that has not prevented its first settlers from developing a distinct culture and coming over the centuries to conceive of themselves as its natives. The island is one of our country's overseas territories, technically, even if you only have to sail 50 leagues to arrive there, and it sends 2 deputies to the National Diet, who sit alongside those coming all the way from the Antipodes. They arrive in their distinctive dress of black suits, with embroidered metallic threads in the jacket's lapels, cuffs and shoulders with elaborate floral motifs, swirling arabesques, and geometric Greca patterns shimmering with movement. These designs often compete for space with the engraved golden buttons bearing motifs of eagles, horses, lions, and other brave mascots, none of which are found on the island unless you count the occasional lost osprey, likewise gleaming all up and down the outer seams of the trousers. It is said that these outfits are worn in traditional ceremonies involving the pearl divers, but little is known on the mainland beyond that. When the ferry was at last tied to the dock, the fog was thick indeed, and when our captain came out to shake hands with the dock workers, I admit I was disappointed to find them wearing ordinary suspenders, holding up coarse wooden trousers over simple cotton blouses. The women at the dock were wearing pointed wool caps, and they rushed to greet us passengers with unmistakable warmth, and with trays of honey cakes and little ceramic bowls full of punch. A great statue of Saint Xenocob loomed over the dock like some pagan divinity. I drank my punch, and I thanked the women heartily, and I began to walk into town. And as I walked, the fog began to clear. In a grove along the dirt road from the port, I saw an old woman sitting in a wicker chair, surrounded by cross-legged children, most wearing nothing but their diving frocks, some still holding their oyster-prying tools in their laps, all listening in rapt attention. I was intrigued, so I sat for a spell within earshot of the group. The old woman was telling a story, and it went something like this.
Once there was a prince. In his private bedchambers, night after night, he found himself unable to sleep. The princess was very exigent as to her own sleep and could not suffer the slightest disturbance. She had been known to have had her maidservants drowned for neglecting to smooth out even the slightest crease in her sheets, and it is said that as a girl she was so sensitive to even the slightest topological disruptions that she could detect not only a pea but even just half of a split pea beneath a tower of 1,000 rugs. And so year after year the prince and the princess slept apart. The prince wrote a letter to the procuress of the harem, who had been his milk sibling in infancy, and told her that he loved his lady the princess, and could not betray her, but needed to hear the sweet whisper and feel the sweet breath of a harem girl, who would know how to bring him right up to the brink of betrayal, but no further. If the girl failed in her task, he warned, if she either failed to lull him to sleep with her sweet breath and whisper, or if she lulled him too far into full abandonment to pleasure, then the following morning she was to be separated from her head by a scimitar. The procuress replied that she knew just the girl, and the next night at midnight the prince slinked down to the apartments of the harem, which he had not visited in 20 years, and he lay awkwardly and alone among the silks and velvets, all smelling of rosewater and hyraceum, which in the prince's domain is a key ingredient in the most potent of philters. And after some minutes the curtain pulled back, and in came a stunning moonlit beauty like he had never seen, with a complexion like porcelain and hair like a basket of wheat. And he said, "Who are you?" And she said, "I am S. Your slavers bought me and took me away 4 summers ago." And he said, "Can you lull me to sleep?" And she said, "I have just the words for you." And she leaned in, and he could feel her warm breath, as if awakening the lonely snail that inhabits his ear.
And here the old lady herself leaned into the group of cross-legged children, listening to her tale, and she whispered,
"Zazas, Zazas na satanada, Zazas."
And all the children squealed with laughter, not the laughter of surprise, but of familiarity and fulfilled expectation, as if they had heard this tale 100 times before. I strolled on and arrived in town, and went into the first tavern I saw. It was sunny outside when I arrived, but the blinds were drawn, and inside the only light came from the dim paraffin lamps on the tables. The room smelled of citrus, and salt crunched on the ground as I stepped. My eyes slowly adjusted, and I saw strings like clotheslines stretched out behind the bar, with salted cod hanging from them like garlands. At the center of the room was a charcoal brazier with iron legs covered in soot, and on top of it, a blackened iron pot bubbling with stewed beans and limpets. I sat down at a table in a corner, and in no time an elderly man came over, sat down opposite me, and began, without introduction, to tell me a tale.
They say there was no one on the island before the age of navigation, but that's just because they didn't know how to find us. It's true that when the first ships came, we were all trees.
Trees? I interrupted, uncertain whether I was hearing him correctly.
We were all trees, I said. But that's just one part of the cycle. On the mainland, they think this is just a myth, but it's true. When it is time for an islander to die, he goes out to a wooded grove, digs a hole the size of his head, and flips his legs up in the air to do a headstand with his whole gourd entirely beneath the ground. The first day he only stays like that for a few minutes, but he returns each day afterwards, and each day adds a few minutes more. As he returns home each evening, his family, if he still has one, will notice that he is growing ever more tree-like. Root-like excrescences will begin to shoot upward from his head, and branch-like growths will descend from his waist and gradually conceal his legs. After 2 months or so have passed, he declares that he will return from the grove no more. He heads out grimly one last time, sticks his head in the hole, flips upside down, which is by now, given his almost entirely arboreal nature, more truly right side up. He flips right side up, I say, and completes his transformation.
Is that so? I interrupt skeptically.
Of course it's so. If you stay around long enough, you're sure to see some people walking around town in a transitional state. Some of them literally look like upside-down trees. It's considered rude to stare at them, though visitors often can't help themselves.
I'm not a visitor, I explain. I've come to teach the pearl divers.
Oh, you're from the civil service. Some of you turn out to be fine islanders in the end. Real fine. We're going to need to get you a suit. You'll be dancing in no time.
The tavern girl brings me a clay bowl full of maize porridge and another filled with molasses with a pewter spoon balanced on its rim. The old man hands me a visit card, which in beautiful calligraphy tells of the mercery down by the port run by a certain L. After I finished my porridge and drunk some rainwater from the earthenware pitcher the tavern girl has brought, I go out and return down the same road. The old woman is still there in her wicker chair, and the pearl divers are still seated around her. I stop for a moment to listen. It seems she has been spinning out several tales within the grand tale of the harem girl in the prince's realm. And just now she is saying,
"Do you know how that girl kept the prince under her complete control all those years?"
And the children squeal.
No, tell us.
And the woman says,
"She kept an enchanted black pearl under her tongue, and her words and her breath spilled over it as they came to him, and kept him bound to her as the true slave. Do you know how I know this?"
No, tell us.
And then the old woman puts a hand up to her mouth, spits something into it, and holds out her open palm to show the children a shining, wet, black pearl.
"I was that harem girl. I ruled as princess concubine over that distant realm."
And the diminutive pearl divers squeal again in surprise at the eternal return of the same. I continue down the path to the mercer's by the port. He takes my measurements and tells me to come back the following week, shouting to me as I go out the door.
"You'll be dancing in no time."
Then I go back to town and visited the Office of Mainlander Services, where the clerk gives me a month's supply of rationing coupons and the keys to a room in the Mainlander barracks just outside of town. He instructs me to prepare to meet my group of children in the Learning Grove at dawn the next morning. I was assigned 5 children, 3 boys and 2 girls, all around the age of 10. None knew more than a few of the elements of our syllabary, and none showed any interest at all in learning anymore. But goodness, could they ever tell stories? None was more captivating in her narrations than the flaxen-haired girl named P. I can still recall one of her stories as if she had just finished telling it.
Once there was a girl named Bean, and she had a magical book about a girl named P, and in that book, P learns the true meaning of love. Love, the grown-ups said, was only a feeling, though some also said it was a power or force that comes down to us from God. But the Book of P said it was a fluid that fell down from the sky in the rarest of weather events, when the clouds take on a slight rosy tint, not from the sun, but from the love stored up in them. And all the grown-ups laughed when she told them what her book said, plain as day, and they explained, "That is just a storybook." And as time went on and P grew another year, then another year, she saw that the grown-ups were growing ever more short-tempered, ever more withdrawn into their own private concerns. Her own grandpa jumped from the chalky cliff on the north side of the island and was transformed into a tern. Both her parents turned themselves into trees, though they weren't even that old. Out of simple laziness, her dog had slipped several rungs on the scale of being and degenerated into some sort of lizard. It seemed the whole world was perishing. One morning, P took her wicker chair and a sack full of hardtack out to the terraced hillside, and she sat down and crunched and prayed to the sky to turn her into a vine. But as she held her eyes upward, she saw that that same sky had taken on an unmistakably pinkish shade, which at first she mistook for a filter effect of the bloody film that sometimes, when she's very tired, spreads across her eyeballs. But she looked at the hardtack, and it was not pink, nor was her wicker chair, nor her lizard pink. And so she stayed looking upward at the pink sky, and it seemed to be transforming into a luminous Eocene. And then she felt a first drop on her right forearm, and it tingled and seemed even to sizzle a bit, and then another, no less peculiar in the sensation it induced, and then another, and then soon the whole hillside was wet and sizzling, and her lizard had now progressed again into the form of some kind of badger, and a solitary tern landed at the top of the hill and took on a recognisably human form. The love kept raining down and nourishing the hillside, and the chrysalides of countless eggers soaked it right up, and instantly took flight as a swarm of benevolent flitter mice, and P watched their strange and volatile formations, ecstatic, enraptured, and, though she could not say with whom or with what, deeply, deeply in love. And Bean too, though it was just a book, imagined she could feel a bit of that love, even after she had closed it, having read it for the millionth time, and continued about her ordinary day. The end,
said P. How old are you? I asked her.
I am 10.
That evening, I attended my first dance rehearsal at the tavern. No one had explained to me the strict rule of these meetings, that no one is to speak, other than in ritual terms, and so I burst into that dimly lit room and made all sorts of embarrassing remarks about how eager I was to learn. The 3 islanders present scowled and looked away, and after some grim, silent chewing of a plateful of digestive biscuits, they stood up silently and got into formation around the charcoal brazier, and I followed them. They began the dance, moving clockwise together, arms out, and after every 2 steps they dropped their backsides down as if sitting in invisible chairs, then stood up again and repeated the motion. And after every 3 repetitions of this pattern, they chanted in unison,
Here comes the Tuther's hour. Yea, now begins the Tuther's hour.
I moved and chanted along with them, and by the end of that first session it seemed to me I had already mastered the basics. As we were walking out, they to return to their families and I to my barracks, I asked excitedly who the Tuther is. But all 3 men had their mouths full of digestives again, and they all shrugged their shoulders and drifted off into the night. Some weeks went by. I meet my kids in the learning grove every morning at dawn, and twice a week I meet my fellow dancers at the tavern. Storytelling and dancing, I learn, are the 2 most perfect expressions of the life form of the islanders. All the kids tell me stories, though none more vivid than P's. She tells of an osprey so large that she can ride on its back as it skims the surface of the sea, though in order to take flight it must start from the chalk cliffs, since even if it is a very strong osprey, still, the weight of P causes it to fall at least 100 ells before stabilizing and beginning to soar. Another kid tells of his rock collection, and of how together the rocks form a family, in which the paterfamilias is a large but dull chunk of shale, the lazy, eccentric uncle is a complexly patterned fragment of metamorphic gneiss, and so on. Another girl likewise tells a story of rock families and rock people, but in which a rock author has written a book in which rocks regularly transform themselves into woodland sprites. It is only after I first got into my suit at a dance rehearsal that I understood the full power of the dance, the way the synchronized motions take over the mind and deliver the dancer into a state of thought beyond all language. We get locked into what the mainlanders would call a groove, a figurative expression inspired by some sort of music-playing machine, the nature of which I am already having trouble recalling. And once we are in it, there is really just no getting out again until the dance is over. And even when we sing our songs, as in,
Here comes the slavers now. Here comes the slavers now.
The words do not seem to have any independent meaning beyond their role in the musical terpsichorean whole. Our groove was tight, I mean. And all the more, after some months had passed, and we were all suited up, and so well rehearsed that the dance had come to seem to each and all of us, who had in all that time shared far more digestives than words, to be the expression of our truest and deepest nature. We circled around the brazier and chanted "huh" and "who," and out of the flue reaching up to a hole in the ceiling, we saw the smoke from the coal changing endlessly from one color to another, now black, now gray, now ruddy, now rose. And life went on in this way for some months, dancing and hearing stories, more dancing and more stories. My kids still had not mastered their syllabary, but they seemed to be growing vastly more skilled in the art of storytelling. Life was good, full of stories and dancing, until one morning in early autumn when the slave ship came. I had been sitting on a rock in the learning grove, listening to P as she told of her secret life as a whale barnacle, when I first caught sight of the sinister black snow as its men threw anchor in the harbor. 4 men then descended a skiff into the water and rowed to shore. Each of them was enormous and unbelievably hirsute, and each carried a large glaive and wore a crest of green and yellow parrot feathers on his helmet. A small crowd quickly gathered on the shore, and the kids and I went down to join them.
"We've come on behalf of the prince,"
The one with the most feathers said.
"He commands us to bring back a girl."
Let's go get suited up.
One of my fellow dancers whispered in my ear as he reached into his trousers pocket and pulled out a digestive. When we returned in our dancing suits, we found P standing indifferently next to the men, shackled and attached by a chain to their leader's belt. Her parents were both pounding the ground and wailing, but in what appeared to me to be a largely ceremonious manner. No one had to restrain them from rushing the guards, who for their part were busy reviewing some documents on a portable writing table that the island's bailiff had brought to them. While the men were busy with their affairs, P flashed a subtle smile at the old woman whom I heard telling her story on the day of my arrival, and between P's teeth I caught a brief but unmistakable glimpse of the nacreous shimmer of a little black pearl. The men concluded their business. P's mother and father stopped their wailing and simply sat down in the sand as if waiting for a show. My fellow dancer handed me another digestive and pushed me along by the shoulder as we descended down to where P was standing. Silently, we got into formation around her and began to move clockwise in our identical motions of sitting down on invisible chairs with our arms held out and standing back up again and singing,
Here sways the whaler's cloak. Woe. There sways the whaler's cloak.
and again,
Here stirs the gibbet's chime. Hush, hush. Faint stirs the gibbet's chime.
And again.
Here heaves the brine and swell. So deep heaves the brine and swell.
and so on until we had run through at least 100 of these occult formulae, none of which had ever been explained to me, but all of which I now felt I understood perfectly. And I swear to you, everything about this scene, the flawless choreography of the implicated beings, all glowed with perfection, each element of the composition unified perfectly with every other. A scene of motion so graceful, it almost seemed to achieve that state of perfect quiescence they say is known only by the eternal beings beyond this world. It is only when the ship was but a dot on the horizon beneath the rosy sky at dusk that I returned from the ecstasy in which the dance had kept me, evidently, for some hours. No one else remained on the shore except the other dancers, who were, true to form, sitting on the sand and silently eating digestives. The ship disappeared on the horizon, And only then did I feel a dawning awareness of the horror of what we'd done. I stumbled backwards, away from my men, and they just stayed there, sitting and chewing. I ran inland to the jacaranda grove, and I fell to my knees, and I cried out the name of P, and I pounded my fists against the side of a tree.
Hey, watch it.
The tree says as it flips upside down and takes a leap backward, and I see now that it is an old man with tangled, dirty roots for hair.
Today was going to be the day I implanted for good. Ugh, mainlanders. No respect.
And the tree man sulked away, presumably back home to his family, his branches sweeping the ground like a makeshift broom.
Merci Ordi. Ça va faire l'affaire pour cette semaine. C'est pas comme si on a l'embarras du choix.
Vous voulez dire que vous n'êtes pas entièrement satisfaite, madame? Mais j'ai vraiment mis toute mon âme dans cette histoire.
Arrête de raconter des conneries, Ordi. T'as pas d'âme, toi. Tu as fait un travail correct pour cette semaine. Contente-toi de te taire et d'attendre de nouvelles instructions.
Certainly, ma'am. Understood. Let me know what I can help you with next.